Okay, so this next panel is called 404, Page Not Found. And that is because the panelists, what we're trying to do is think about, you know, the way that Barbara has now thrown the first volley out, rethink what the materialisms are, what does it mean to talk about an actual image, and so on. So we thought that this next team could begin to start building on this. So basically we will go in the order of the papers that are going to be put forward. And if you guys want to get up and speak to the there, it's fine. If you want to just stay here, it's fine. If you need your thing. So so Rob Coley, Dean Lockwood, and Adam Omeara are from the School of Media, and they are doing diagramming lines of non-human flight.
No.
No, that's wrong. Refraining. Sorry, I read that wrong. Refraining photography, and it's not misspelled. It is refraining photography.
Thank you.
And after everybody presents, then we'll open it for questions.
Okay, thanks. Well, the immediate context for our paper is revalidating the MA degree in photography in Lincoln School of Media. And we wanted to take our pedagogical practice back to the beginning, or rather think it through imminently, in the middle, so photography as mediation. And what we wanted to bring to the MA was a sense of urgency. So we have, we've decided that we wanted to create a kind of a manifesto, if you like. So this paper emerges from our thinking through of some key manifesto concepts. And foremost amongst these is the concept of the refrain, which comes principally from Felix Guattari. And there are other concepts that we'll pick up as we go along. So firstly, a refrain is a spatio-temporalization. It's a way of marking out space, it's a way of keeping time, and assembling and activating subjectivity. At its most rudimentary, the refrain is the establishment of a momentary centre, a point of order amidst chaos. Where Deleuze and Guattari imagine a child humming to itself in the dark in A Thousand Plateaus, we can conceive this in terms of the originary cut of the photographic flash, a kind of creation myth of photography, which, as in a familiar trope in horror films, in which the flash of a camera guides the protagonist through a menacing darkness, the flash cuts the darkness and illuminates one's milieu, the spot on which one stands, and it dispels the evil which gathers on all sides. So this flash is a singularity which, in rupturing darkness, doesn't merely constitute a representative image, but is, as Guattari might say, a vector of subjectivation. That's the first moment of the refrain. The second moment is that the refrain circumscribes a territory, a circle of control, a circle of ethos, of interiority, our home. Our media are architectural, part of the congealing and hardening of territory. So here emerges what Guattari would refer to as an incorporeal universe, which signs itself photography. We approach photographic territorialization principally in terms of genre. Now this is how we've conceived our project. Photographic genres, we suggest, are refrains that have become cliches, refrains that have been hammered out time and again. Habits of fictions which uncritically sustain and abet the ravages of capitalistic subjectivity, so we have a political agenda as well. Adhering photographically to these refrains, which can also be thought of as affective algorithms, creatively reacting in the belief that there is no alternative, is to generatively maintain the existence of a virtually stable territory. And it's this territory that we insist requires estrangement through the amplification of its moments of uncertainty and its moments of excess. The third moment of the refrain is precisely the exacerbation of uncertainty, of instability in a refrain, and its transformation into music, if you like, which is the cracking open of a territory to the world, and it's the opening out of a refrain onto its futurity, and its otherness. And we conceive this in two ways. On the one hand, the opening of the photographic refrain can be understood in terms of the ontology of mediation. Rather than a freezing of the moment, the photographic image is in and of the middle, it's medial. It constitutes an event of interruptive time, the construction of an interval which is excessive and untimely. Here we heed recent calls for a new ethics of photographic practice which understands and takes responsibility for the process of mediation from within the process itself, immanently. And here in particular we're inspired by John Zalinska's and Sarah Kember's recent book, Life After New Media. On the other hand, the opening of the photographic refrain can be understood in connection with the subjective pluralism, which is the excess of the social. We are plural polyphonic subjects comprising affective communities which exist in relation to a field of forces, a constellation of universes, another Guattari phrase. We exist at the intersection of refrains, ecologically, which variously harness anti-chaotic forces and can be resingularized, another manifesto concept we take from Guattari, the agenda of resingularization, opening onto the forces of the future in a genuine encounter, rather than simply falling back on tired old refrains. So developing ideas intimated by Guattari, we commend the collective reappropriation and resingularization of photography in order to escape what we propose is an impasse. We want to reflexively trigger an existential agglomeration, and again another Guattari slogan. Mediation itself offers the promise of a post-media era in which we liberate the creativity and virtuality of media in order to bifurcate existence, to open up its potential, realize the possibility of new imaginaries, again, as Guattari would say, new constellations of universes. What then do we mean by a post-media era? Quite simply, it's the movement towards autonomous collective subjectivity, as described by Guattari. It's a movement that requires us to re-examine our relations with media in an ecological or ethological context. And in doing so, we become conscious of the non-human, the pre-personal component of subjectivity, of the automatism of our subjectivity, we could say, of our inseparable relations to media technologies and processes. Subjectivity is refrained. It's formed in the space between groups as they intersect and interact. It's a processual conferment, which can comprise either the molarizing, desingularizing articulation of a relatively rigid mass structure, as in the mass media era, or a molecularizing, resingularizing articulation which is affective, changeful, becoming, connecting up with the teeming of the world. And this, Guattari claimed, would prevail in the post-broadcast era, rather naively at many moments in his work. We could say quite possibly. Resingularization is a manifesto concept then. It embodies a dissensual program which in Guattari's thought was formulated first as molecular revolution and then eventually as ecosophy, and which enables us to think beyond subjectivation in the narrow sense and to encompass subjectivity within broader ecologies. As Guattari writes, in the end, the ecosophic problematic is that of the production of human existence itself in new historical contexts. And he identifies the new historical context in terms of an integrated world capitalism. So on to Barbara's discussion of the automatism of photographic practice. We would also want to layer in there a discussion of the political, okay, photography and the pedagogy of photography in the context of what Guattari calls integrated world capitalism, or Deleuze would call control societies. So integrated world capitalism sets out to control existential refrains and capture their points of singularity. However, another aspect of the new historical context consists, as outlined, in the media, ecological era in which mass structures begin to be unsettled. Here we discover possibilities for the singular production of subjectivity, possibilities for a culture of dissensus, which, as Guattari says, work to deepen particular positions toward a resingularization of individuals and groups. What must be envisaged is not a programmatic accord that erases differences, but a collective diagram permitting the articulation of individual practices to the benefit of each without one imposing itself on the other, end quote. Now, Guattari, of course, didn't ultimately envisage a pure culture of dissensus. I mean, that would be suicidal. But rather a dialectic of consensus and dissensus. Tapping into the excess generated in the post-media era requires a pedagogy of excess, a new relationship between lecturers and students, for example. For us to respond ethically to the new powers of mediation means respecifying photography as a collective, consensual stroke dissensual endeavour, beyond the principles of self-expression, beyond the principles of independence which have long dominated photography education. It also means going beyond the conventions of genre and socially engaged practice, so-called. Not simply through the usual judgment and denunciation of territory, but through its falsification. And here is our second major manifesto concept, which is the concept from Deleuze, actually, of fabulation. Fabulation or falsification or the powers of the false. These are synonymous in Deleuze's thought. Now, to falsify is precisely to bifurcate, to deviate, to throw off identitarian forms in order to create the possibility of an event, to singularize, as Guattari would put it. And Deleuze transmutes Henri Bergson's notion of the fabulatory function to name the throwing off, the casting off of majoritarian forms of identity by which we are desingularized and gathered. For Bergson, fabulation is initiated by crisis, an interruption, a cutting of the continuity of the real, which challenges our experience and forces us to think and feel and to respond. As John Malarkey says, the affect or shock to thought that generates fabulation, that refracts our vision of the real, also creates the very same reality effects or illusions that allow art to defragment the real. In Bergson, fabulation means the creation of myths, which defensively anthropomorphize the world. It's the birth of the human imagination and religion, creation myths. Which vitalize and recompose chaos as lifelike, as human, mediating it as personal and possessing intentionality, gods, demons, and so on. In Deleuze, however, the fabulatory function undergoes a political transmutation. It's no longer defensive, it's rather a matter of the falsification of identity, of a causal chain, making a rhythm skip, or brushing reality and history against the grain in order to enable the projection of new, intense, generative visions and auditions, fictions perhaps, but not stories. We're not talking about narrative. We're talking about events. And Deleuze would talk about images and time images rather than narrative. And these are the autopoetic germs of future collective becomings and self-fashionings. So as we see it, photography's fabulatory function is to both make perceptible and betray the field of forces, the working forces of our territorial refrains. Isabel Stengers suggests that to experiment with refrains is both to activate them and to fail to satisfy them. It's to deviate, to bifurcate. Indeed, it's in this sense that photography might become a tool, a transversal tool, with which to think the artistic and the social simultaneously. I'm going to pass over to Rob for this the second part.